welcome to whatever is happening to Britain. Today's guest is someone who's shown real courage, not just in politics, but in speaking openly about things many people struggle to say out loud. Elliot Colburn is the former Conservative MP for Carlston and Wallington. Is that how you pronounce your constituency's name?
That's right. I used to have it said a million different times, so well done.
I did Google it. Elected in 2019 at just 27. During his time in Parliament, he campaigned on issues ranging from healthcare to LGBTQ plus rights, and was known for his dedication to his local community. Today, we're talking about politics, pressure, mental health, and what needs to change. Elliot, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you both so much for inviting me on.
I'm excited. Could you kind of start telling us about what first inspired you to go into politics?
You know what? This is the one question I used to get asked a lot, whether it be through local media outlets or when you went to go and visit schools, or even just people stopping you in the street and saying, particularly because I was one of the younger MPs at the time. I wasn't the youngest. There was about 5, believe it or not, MPs who were younger than me. So not that I was bitter about that or anything. But we used to get asked that question all the time. And it's such an interesting question because people come into politics for all sorts of different reasons. Some, it's almost like a family business. Their parents or their relatives were politicians and they just were involved in politics from a very young age. That was not me. My parents voted, but probably couldn't be less interested in day-to-day politics. So for me, I think my first memory of politics and how I got interested in it was from school, actually. My school was very, very up on making sure that we knew what the political world was all about, what different levels of politicians were responsible for. And I remember thinking, oh, this is really interesting how decisions get made and why. And as I got older, I looked around and I looked at the different political parties, and I found that my values, I felt, aligned best with the Conservative Party. So I joined them and I started getting involved in frontline politics in terms of knocking on doors. And I got the bug for it and I absolutely loved doing it. I loved talking to people. I loved hearing people's concerns. I loved trying to problem solve. So the minute that I turned 18, I was like, right, I really want to get involved in elected politics now. I'm old enough, I can vote and I can stand. This is exciting. So I stood for my first ever council seat, lost, but I didn't get put off. And I kept on going and I ran again, became a councillor, and then became an MP very shortly after that, a lot earlier in my life than I had planned. But I think, that first initial spark for me really was from school. And then as I got older, I just felt elected politics was the way to go, not just because I enjoyed it, but because I felt the best way to make change was to get stuck in and actually do it. People obviously get involved in campaigning for change in many different ways, but I felt that elected politics was the best way to do it. So that's where I ended up.
And do you think starting being an MP so young is maybe part of the reason you struggled so much with your mental health? Or do you think maybe you were kind of already, I guess, prone to it? I guess some people just are, aren't they, really?
It's a very good question. And it was one of the things I got asked a lot in the immediate aftermath of my Prime Minister's question, where I revealed what had happened to me, and I'm sure we'll get into that. That was probably the question I got asked the most, was why? Why do you feel that this happened to you at this stage in your life? And did it have anything to do with you being so young and being in that high pressure environment? I think looking back, and I've reflected on this a few times, I think it would be foolish to say that it didn't make it worse. Whether that was the primary reason, I don't think it was, because I did love doing that job. Yeah. But I don't think it was the primary reason, but I do think it was an exacerbating factor. I think it did make it worse.
I think with lots of these things, kind of from my experience, and I'm sure you'd agree that it's not necessarily always just one thing. Like there might be a core reason, but then if it was just that reason, it might be okay. But it's when everything, there's all of these little reasons, and then there's this kind of one big reason. That's when it kind of all starts.
No, you're absolutely right. And now I've been privileged enough to carry on the work in suicide prevention in the work that I do now. I've left Parliament in working for Samaritans, a suicide prevention charity. And that comes out loud and clear in the evidence and in the research that mental health conditions in and of themselves aren't always the biggest risk factor to suicide, actually. Only about 25% currently are recorded. It is so much that is going on in your life, and it's never one reason. And the thing that triggers suicidal ideation can be something in and of itself is quite small, but you have to consider everything that is going on in someone's life and what has led them up to this point. And for me, I think that was very, very true. There was not a single thing I can point to and say, this was the reason. This happened to me, and that is exactly what pushed me into it. There was lots going on at that time. And yes, being a very young MP at a time when things were not going very well politically as well, I might add, did add the pressure on. And it certainly exacerbated those feelings of hopelessness and being trapped in my own mind, certainly. But I would never say that being an MP in and of itself was the risk factor, if that makes sense.
100%.
Do you think it's worse for the backbench MPs? Because they're often sort of feel their constituents expect a lot of them, but they often, if you're not a minister or the Prime Minister, then it's actually quite difficult to push through change. Did you think that makes a bit of a difference as well?
That's such an interesting question. You know, I've never been asked that before, and I'm not even sure I've given it much thought. That's so interesting. But I suppose you're right, because a lot of the time when we had constituents, because us as MPs, we did talk to each other a lot about the kind of inbound messages we were getting and comparing if what we were hearing was just happening to us or if it was happening to others. And I think there was a difference. I think there was a feeling amongst particularly those people who are politically engaged enough to know that their local MP is a minister, almost didn't expect them to necessarily be able to reply positively to them if they disagreed with something that the government was doing, because they were a government minister. So in order for them to disagree with the government would mean them resigning their position or being kicked out of their position, which no one is going to do unless they feel so strongly about this one issue. So it's very rare. Whereas for backbenchers, because you have that little bit more freedom, I think there was a higher expectation. There was this thought that actually you can speak up and say something because you're not going to lose a government job if you do so. There's always the risk that you might lose the government whip if you were to be too rebellious. But I think there was an expectation that backbenchers should use the freedom that they've got, not being bound by what we call collective responsibility, i.e. everyone who is a government minister has to sing from the same hymn sheet and they are all responsible. Because you're not bound by that to such a certain extent, I think particularly those constituents who are politically engaged did expect more, perhaps. But that is so fascinating. I'd love to explore that in more detail and think more about that. But just off the top of my head, that's what comes to mind.
Okay, lovely. Do you think kind of the reality of being an MP was different, or did you said that you kind of really enjoyed it? Do you think, was it different from what you expected, or
100%. You know, lots of people have insights to what MPs do because you can see it on TV, you can interact with your local MP. I've worked for MPs in the past as well, so I've seen a lot of what they do on a day-to-day basis. So I think for me, I knew and didn't necessarily was surprised by what's involved in the day-to-day work. I knew that I would be turning up to vote. I knew that I would have to have casework to deal with. I knew that I would have to respond to constituents, etc., etc. But I think the one thing that no one can ever prepare you for is that despite the fact that you are in a wider political party of, for us, it was 365 when you got elected. And you've got people around you, you've got party members around you, you've got a team around you. At the end of the day, the buck does stop with you in the local community. You know, you are the local MP. So regardless of what the government is doing, the work that you're entrusting others to support you with, ultimately there is one person that people can see and hold accountable in that community that you represent, and that is you. And I don't think there's any way to prepare someone for the way that that lands emotionally and how that ends up feeling. And it can both feel an enormous privilege, but also incredibly scary and daunting at the same time. And it took a while for that reality to sink in. You know, once you win your seat for the first time, you're on an absolute high, you're buzzing, you're ready to go. The first few weeks are really exciting as you're getting used to it. And then the reality starts to sink in, and it hit us quite hard, actually, because we were elected in obviously December 2019, and then we were hit very quickly with COVID. So the reality of the job hit us very quickly, I think. But I don't think there is a training course you can develop or a set of words that you can say to someone to prepare them for that. I'm not sure what you can do to fully make someone appreciate that before they get there. And certainly it hit me.
Yeah, I guess it's just maybe about offering support more for MPs and stuff like that, because that kind of, you know, leads on to onto the next question of like, was kind of mental health, and I guess it's common in every workplace, but particularly amongst MPs, was that quite a common experience?
It was, and it became clear to me after I had come out publicly just how much of an extent that was an issue amongst MPs, because many MPs reached out to me after I said what I said and said that they had either had similar experiences themselves. Some had even made attempts themselves as well on their own life. And I was shocked by that, because I genuinely didn't think that there would have been many. I thought that, you know, to be an MP, you need quite a strong constitution. You need to be emotionally have skin like rhino hide, essentially, to be able to get through with all the rubbish that is thrown at you. But there was quite a lot. I heard from so many colleagues who said that they had had days like that, or they had felt like that. And whilst there was some form of support in place, it didn't feel like it was catered correctly to MPs and what they were dealing with, and that more needed to be done. I didn't think that anyone didn't take it seriously, but I just felt as if what was there didn't really touch the sides.
I think lots of the time these things are put in place more from like we're gonna like just I don't know what the word is. Do you know what I mean? Like organizations will put them in place just so they look like they're trying to do something sometimes. And I think, you know, it's not that they don't care, but it's just like, oh, we've done it. And like, yeah.
they just pay lip service. Yeah, really. Yeah.
That's my impression. I don't know if that's what you found from being in Parliament or.
I think so. You know, there were things such as an employee assistance program. There was obviously support services available that MPs could call. And of course, you had your own GP, you had your own health services that you could reach out to as a private individual as well, of course, if you felt like you wanted to. But, you know, what has become clearer and clearer to me as the length of time has grown between when I made my attempts and where I am now in my life, and looking back at it with fresher and fresher eyes, is that fact again that suicidal ideation is not always, in fact, probably not even the majority of the time, linked to a mental health condition. So it's not the case that you identify that something's not quite right and you need to address a chemical imbalance in your brain, and you have to go down these sorts of routes and find these solutions in medicine. It's actually, what is life throwing at a person? And what are those life experiences, and how does someone how can someone build up emotional resilience to deal with the things that life is throwing at them? And I think that is one of the things that was missing from the support that was available. It's not necessarily that you couldn't call someone if you were in crisis, because you could. It's just the fact that there was nothing really there to prepare members of Parliament for the reality of what being an MP was going to be like, and how difficult it could be for them. Just paid sort of lip service to it.
Do they have sort of I suppose it would be helpful if, you know, former MPs could sort of give people in their party some sort of coaching as well. I mean, but does that service exist or not? That would be more to do with the party than the actual your employer, I suppose. Yeah.
Why? I think it's a mixture of responsibilities. I think the parliamentary estate itself has a responsibility to provide certain services, but I do think political parties, I agree, also need to think about the services that they're offering too. There's an argument that was made to me that, well, actually, if you can't hack it, you shouldn't be there, because MPs are always going to have tough things. And that is true. But I think the problem with that mindset necessarily is that it's not about the job. It's not about what people might be saying to you on social media, for example. That was a water off a duck's back. It's the fact of your life experiences whilst in a high pressure environment can get exacerbated, and that's where the support needs to be. And I think you're right. I think it would have been really helpful for me to hear from former MPs or from more senior MPs who had been there for a longer period of time and had survived scandals or survived governments going up and down, to be able to turn around to you and say, everything you're going through and everything you're feeling is normal, but believe me, it doesn't stick. You can come out the other side. You will see the wood from the trees. At the end of the day, you will be fine. You will be fine. And that is the thing that, when I think a lot of people who experience suicidal thoughts, that is the thing that I wish I could believe and wish I could hear. I just wanted that crystal ball. I wanted to be able to feel as if, okay, everything does feel quite dark at the moment, but there is an end and things are going to get better and things are going to feel okay. That is the thing that I wish I had been told.
Yeah, I think another thing that I kind of always speak about in my advocacy is kind of the importance of prevention. And actually, like, it's not that helpful letting people get to crisis. It's about stopping that from happening. And it is so doable as well. Like, if people do tend to show signs of these things, and also teaching people how to, you know, help their own mental health and stuff is way more effective than, you know, helping people once they get to crisis point.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. Prevention is key, not just, frankly, in mental health, but across health more broadly. That is the future. It is incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult to deal with something once it hits crisis point, and recovery can be stunted. As a result, you might be limited in how far you can recover. You know, I feel very lucky that I do consider myself to be fully recovered. I no longer, for example, on any medication or therapies, and I'm living my life as close to what you might call, I hate the word, but as most close to what you might call as normal as possible.
Yeah.
It's but it's definitely not helpful to let someone get to that point, because how much damage might have been done up to the point of reaching crisis might be irreparable in many cases. So prevention is absolutely key. And I think part of that does rely on supporting someone's own emotional resilience and giving them the tools to support themselves before something happens, and knowing that if they do experience a feeling like that in their life, then they're equipped with the tools to be able to deal with it. That's not to say they won't need help. That's not to say they won't need to reach out and they won't need services, whether they be medical or otherwise. But just to know that they can recognize the signs, be equipped to recognize the signs, and then seek that help that they need before crisis hits. And I'm a big, big believer in that preventative work.
Oh, 100%. It's something when I was unwell, I couldn't quite understand was that why, because I kind of showed lots of signs in my early childhood of kind of becoming unwell. And Mum, we tried to reach out to CAMHS when I was about 13, didn't we?
Yeah.
And obviously they're just so kind of, the waiting list is so long.
Yes. Yeah.
But if they'd intervened then I may not have reached the stage of being so unwell where I had to spend all this time in hospital.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main struggle obviously it was slightly, you're in a different situation because you're an adult when you had these feelings, but it's much difficult for parents of young children because children's services is very, very underfunded.
Yes.
And they probably don't even have enough trained and qualified staff to actually cope, particularly since COVID, because obviously that seems to have exacerbated the crisis quite severely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I just wondered, sort of in terms of services, I mean, obviously you managed to get some sort of support from the NHS, is that right?
I did, and I always caveated everything that I said at the time after I talked about my own experience, and everything that I've said since is that I do fully recognise that my experience isn't necessarily the experience that others have when trying to reach services. So my interaction with the NHS was when I hit crisis point. So I'd made the attempt and was picked up by emergency services. I was taken by ambulance to a hospital, a A&E hospital. I was assessed first for any physical damage and then transported to a mental health hospital to start my psychological treatment. That all happened in quite quick succession. And after I was discharged from hospital, I was visited daily, actually, at the time, by the outpatient team, by someone who actually came to my house. And that continued until a series of talking therapies had been put in place, and they were confident that a fully worked out treatment plan had been established. Now, this all happened in the course of a few weeks, and then obviously I went on to my longer term treatment plan, speaking to my therapists, and I can't fault that process. I appreciate, though, that for many, many people, they don't get that. Even people in crisis can get turned away.
It's so interesting as well, because I mean, it was the same with you, Mum, wasn't it? You, when Mum got very unwell, you were taken to A&E by my dad, and it was, you found a bed the same night in the mental health unit, weren't you, or the next day?
Yes, yeah, they did. They were sort of quite supportive, but I think more and more, they're trying not to admit people into psychiatric hospitals. They want them to be supported in the community. But I think that I don't know how well that's working, because I don't think that there's enough people actually in the community to support people. I mean, I can imagine, it sounds to me as if you had a sort of quite a good service, but a lot of the time, I think with you didn't have quite very good outpatient service, did you?
I think it often depends on the area you're in, lots of the time as well, and what the mental health services is like that. Like, if you're in one side of Brighton, and the mental health services are really good, but if you're in the other side of Brighton, and if you live in the other side, then they're not as good, which I'm always like, so it's so weird. It really depends. But for me personally, I was 17, and when I was in A&E, and it took 2 weeks. I was in A&E for 2 weeks before I got a bed in a hospital, and it was all the way in Coventry. Wow. From Brighton, so Mum had to make this massive journey to Coventry.
I think that's partly because she was still under children's services.
Yeah,
and that's very few children's psychiatric units.
Yeah, and they all get shut down as well for.
But I have heard of adults being sent quite far afield as well. But when you were an MP, did you have constituents contact you at all about helping them access mental health services, or?
I mean, all the time, particularly CAMS, as you mentioned it. So particularly for children, the waiting lists were huge, because more and more people were presenting wanting diagnoses for autism and ADHD, for example, which was causing huge backlogs in assessment times. So that there were also people who wanted to be seen by CAMS, not necessarily for autism or ADHD diagnoses, but for either suicidal ideation or other mental health conditions, who were not being seen quickly. because the waiting list was so long. And even adults, it did have to happen to a certain extent as well. I mean, in South London, because of the Springfield Hospital and the Maudsley, I touch wood, I think we are fairly well catered for in terms of hospital spaces. And Springfield is expanding quite substantially, actually, as well. But children and CAMS, there was definitely issues. I was always picking up cases for people in terms of waiting times, and I did have adults as well, but it was overwhelmingly CAMS. I got people asking me to help them access.
What do you think the kind of solution to that is then, in reducing that waiting time?
I think it's a mixture of different things. So the current government is putting a lot of weight onto its commitment to bring in, I think, 8,500 new mental health staff. Additional staff absolutely is needed. We talk about the need for parity of esteem between physical and mental health, and that does mean that the staffing levels also need to be uplifted. So definitely not going to say that's not going to help, as long as they can meet that target, of course. But I think it's also looking at the fact that the system is currently overloaded, and you need to put in an effort to bring down those waiting lists now, because it's going to take a long time to train people up. We talk about expanding training places, but you've got to remember that it takes 5 to 7 years for people to be fully qualified. So we need to be doing things now to address those backlogs. And that can be difficult. So you have to try and convince people to come back into the workforce who may have left. It may be looking at pay or pension rules within the system, for example, to encourage people to come back. And also looking at criteria, and looking at preventative measures as well. So trying to make sure that actually we're not just looking at the crisis end, we are trying to put things in place a lot earlier with the current demand as much as humanly possible. So for me, that includes going as far back as health visiting. So looking at health visits again, which have been cut to the bone, but supporting new mums with their children up to the age of 2 or 3. And then the drive that was started under the last government, which is being carried on by this one, to get mental health support workers into schools, again, to identify signs, to have those early conversations, I think is absolutely vital that carries on as well. So I don't think it's any one solution. I don't think it's anything, but I think you've got to do what you can to bring the backlog down as it currently stands, realizing that it's going to take a while to train thousands of new people to come into the workforce at any rate. It doesn't matter if you started 2 years ago, they're still going to be 5 years off being fully qualified. So you have to do what you can to bring the waiting list down now.
I mean, my kind of my issue with these government targets of kind of increasing staff, obviously it's great, but my kind of concern is also the quality of the staff.
Yeah.
Because personally, obviously, when I was in hospital, obviously the psychiatrists and people like that are trained quite well. But it's the staff you see every day, like the support workers and people like that who their training courses are just like literally like 3 days, and then they're loose with vulnerable children. It's so wild to me. So I think that it's really about also making sure the quality of the staff is up to the standard as well.
Absolutely, the quality of the training that they provide needs to be looked at again. But again, when we're talking about prevention, I don't think, again, I'm not sure if that fully sits within medicine. We talk about equipping people for life experiences and what life might throw at them. And for example, now working at Samaritans, we have however million hours of calls a year that we take, And the data from that shows that the primary reasons that people are phoning up are things such as financial instability, loneliness, relationship breakdown, things like that. But there's nothing in place to necessarily help someone understand, whether it be at school or even a bit later in life, that these things are part of life's journey and could happen to you. And these are the things that you can do to prepare yourself for them. And I think we are doing ourselves a bit of a disservice in terms of education, actually, and what could be done at a very early stage to equip people for the kind of challenges that life will throw at you. Because I don't think I ever received anything like that. You know, there is something around physical and social health in the national curriculum. But in reality, I don't recall, and I'm pretty sure it's still not the case today, that people in school are ever fully exposed to the fact that life can be difficult and life can throw pretty nasty things your way. And you have to find your ways of responding to those moments. So I think, yeah, as much as it's important that we look at the medical pathway, that you look at the training that's given to medical professionals, that you look at the clinical pathways for someone presenting at various stages. I think when you're looking at prevention, you have to look outside medicine as well. You have to look at
100%. There has to be a complete approach. What I was going to say as well on the topic of kind of, oh goodness me, sorry, you know when you have a thought and then it goes bye-bye.
Time.
Yeah, no, I was going to say about, we were talking about schools, and you said it's important to prepare young people for the fact that life will be difficult. And I think the interesting thing about that is that as a young person, it's kind of like you see people and you think their lives are together, and you think everything is, you know, you kind of you see, like, even like from like seeing people's drawers be organized on social media, like it's just like you think that everyone's life is really put together, and it's just not. But I also think it's interesting to say like, oh, preparing young people for the fact life will be difficult, because so many young people at the moment are having a difficult life earlier and earlier on. And it's like, I don't know, I guess it's also about putting support in for those people as well.
Definitely.
And, yeah, you're often presented, I think they're presented more and more with social media, which makes them think that everyone else's life is perfect as well, and they have friends, etc. And I think social media has affected a lot of young people, and we don't really know the reasons why or how that's happening.
I completely agree, because there is differing thought about this, and there are people who vehemently are anti this spotlight being put on social media at the moment. They think it's anti-free speech, or they think it's anti-business, or whatever it might be. But for me, I've racked my brains, I've looked at the evidence, and I continue to struggle to see an alternative reason. What has changed drastically in the last few years in society, in life? What is the new thing that has been introduced that has led to these huge spikes of mental health conditions, spikes in autism diagnosis, spikes in ADHD diagnoses, for example? What is the big societal change? And it is tech, particularly social media. And all of the evidence that has been shown from schools that do take a very serious approach to this. So whether they're banning phones outright, or whether they are doing a voluntary system, for example, where they're trying to get children to part way from their smartphones for the duration of the school day, the changes are just immense, and what they're able to do. So again, I know that it's not everything, and there's no silver bullet. I do think you have to go back as early as health visiting and nursery, for example, to truly look at preventative measures, including early socialization of children, looking at parents as well and their abilities to look after children's emotional well-being. But I do think there is a massive thing that we're missing at the moment in terms of smartphones and social media amongst people of school age. So I really do hope, because I know there's a big argument at the moment, the government is resisting making those sorts of interventions. But I genuinely think the evidence is there that more needs to be done. And the results, I think, from what has been done speak for themselves.
Why do you think they're resisting it? Do you think it's because of the tech companies lobby such a lot? Or?
I think so. I think definitely some resistance from tech. I think there's also a fear of putting, more almost policing responsibilities on schools, when there is a school of thought that, parents should be doing this. But of course, children will spend, I can't remember the exact figure, but however long of their childhood in the school environment. So of course the school has some responsibility. So I do think there's a bit of a mix, but of course the tech lobbies are very, very strong. And we're seeing that at the moment with the Online Safety Act, which was passed under the last government and is currently being turned on bit by bit, where there are resistance voices being heard from the industry, because they see it as infringement on their ability to operate. They see it as infringement on their free speech. They see it as infringement on freedom. And of course, you've always got to keep one eye on government regulation. There's always, I think, room for healthy skepticism when governments seek to take control of things. But for me, the evidence for children and social media is so strong that absolutely more needs to be done in that space.
I mean, personally, as a young person, my kind of, first of all, my experience with social media has been reasonably positive. I think the only thing that really made me kind of question my relationship with social media was the fact that when there is this idea that everyone's life is perfect and yours is just falling apart and you just need to catch up with everything. But I think it's also teaching young people to look at these things with a critical mind, and to also, I don't know, just, you hear this term so much as a child, which is not everything you see on social media is true. And I think there needs to be some sort of different way of going at it. I'm not quite sure what that would be, but I don't think that works.
No, you're absolutely right. We do try to keep saying, I think it was David Cameron who once said, Twitter is not Britain. He, of course, was talking, I think, politically rather than about the effect of social media on children. But it's true. It's true. And I do think a lot of parents are doing their best. And I think schools are doing their best to try and turn around and say, what you're seeing online is not real life. You are seeing something that someone has confected in order to get someone's views. And why are they looking for views? It's because the more views they get, they can monetize their content and they can make a living out of this. And at the moment, I'm not sure we found the right form of words to actually make younger people believe that and believe what we're trying to say to them. But equally, I do think there needs to be a more concerted effort to actually try to remove so much social media time from a person's life, and I'm guilty of it. I'm now 33 in a few weeks. I find myself guilty of I think the Gen Z phrase is doom scrolling, when you're stuck. I find myself stuck and I catch myself after 2-3 hours
that's the term.
Exactly. I find myself doing it even as someone approaching their mid-30s, and I know plenty of people who are older doing it,
just having a little scroll. And it's even when I think we also don't get those time periods to just sit and think, you're so, because it's like, oh, I don't have anyone to talk to right now, so I'm just going to scroll. You don't get the time.
You see everyone on the bus, etc., or just the train, and they're constantly
no one
on
just
their
drifts
phone,
off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say about the whole, I think the best way to teach children to not believe everything they see on social media maybe is to also not, like, it needs to be taken out the context of social media.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's like, just because they're like this doesn't mean you need to be like that and stuff like that, and just teaching it from a very young age. Because I think once you start shouting about how bad social media is, not saying that's what you're saying, but you get what I mean, kids just go,
you will lose the room. Absolutely.
What's telling about social media is apparently a lot of the people who work in Silicon Valley actually won't allow their kids access to social media until they get over a certain age. So obviously people actually working in the sector have concerns about it in relation to their children. So
we were having these debates. So I was an MP when we were debating and passing the Online Safety Act, and we had ferocious debates about how strong or otherwise it needed to be, particularly when it comes to children and age verification, and not just necessarily social media, but things like age verification on, let's call it, adult websites, and the need to bring that in. And we still didn't reach agreement on things like that. And there were fears and there were concerns, for example, about people using social media to try and reach out who might be living in difficult situations such as domestic violence, for example, or living in controlling environments, which meant that they had to create fake accounts and they couldn't verify who they are because they needed that, either the anonymity or they needed a pseudonym to be able to reach out successfully. And, you know, I understood those arguments, but there's definitely, I think, I'm not sure we struck the right balance by the time the Act got passed. And I really don't think that now the Online Safety Act is being switched on, I doubt it will last in its current form without more and more changes being made, because at the time we said this Act has to be future proof, because the online space is currently regulated by something called the Malicious Communications Act, or the Communications Act. These are things from the 80s, before social media,
yeah,
and before really the internet really took off. And we said we're going to make sure that this is future proofed. And then in the few years since that Act was passed, we've had the boom in artificial intelligence and AI, which it was not prepared for. So I don't think you will ever fully create a piece of legislation that is ready to, no, exactly. The online space is always evolving.
It's not going to happen. I mean, I think we need to recognize that these laws need to be, you know, reviewed regularly.
Exactly. And Parliament can be really slow. And that's what I found really frustrating, is that when these emerging issues come out, politics is one of the slowest fields in the country. It's incredibly frustrating. You know, if this was the private sector, you would have reacted quickly, you would have identified the gap in the market, you would have got in there, you would have changed something. But politicians could be really slow. But frustratingly, we demonstrated that through COVID, you could react fast when you wanted to.
Yeah,
that's what really annoys me, is that we've proven as politicians you can actually respond to things pretty fast when you need to. And yet we seem to have reverted back. I say we, I'm not in the Parliament anymore, but looking at this current Parliament, they've reverted back to the days of, okay, right, well, we need to do a review on this. You know,
also, if someone doesn't comply, if a company doesn't comply with the Online Safety Act, it's all very well having these laws in place, but how easy is it for then someone who's been affected by it to actually take some sort of legal action? I mean, that's another concern I have with all these sort of regulations as well.
This is it. So the Act was designed and to put in a certain amount of user protections, which, you know, are fairly strong, but you have to have a certain amount of your own online literacy to know what your rights are under this new Act, and be able to know, okay, I should have the ability to challenge my platform or whatever site I'm using and they should be implementing things to comply with the Online Safety Act in order for it to be obvious how I do so. From what I've seen so far, that hasn't been implemented. And then you need to know what your rights are to refer to Ofcom as the regulator, and then the powers that they have, etc., etc. It's all very well bringing these things in, but at the moment, I've not seen a seismic shift in the way that these platforms are responding to the responsibilities, the limited responsibilities that are in the Online Safety Act. And we see it in suicide prevention, actually, because there is some horrible, horrible sites out there that we call suicide forums. And of course, it is an offence in the UK to encourage someone to take their own life.
Well, someone's just been arrested for it recently, haven't they? It's the first person who's been convicted for murder or manslaughter.
Exactly. But considering how much content there is online, the fact that only few have been done is extraordinary. And the fact that these sites are still operating despite it being illegal, again, is extraordinary. So I think it requires an individual to have a certain amount of literacy about how the internet works and what their rights are, which frankly, most of us have got too much going on in our lives to sit down and read the Online Safety Act and what it means for us. So I do think that it's going to have to evolve.
This was another thing I wanted to touch on, if that's okay. I was going to just talk about, so personally, and this is something I've spoken a lot with my dad about, is the access that young people have to kind of really dangerous, basically suicide drugs through social media, and the advertisement of them on platforms like Snapchat and Telegram. And what, is there any plan for the government to ever do anything about that?
It's interesting. So it's something that I'm currently working on at the moment. So through my work with Samaritans, we are doing some advocacy work in this space. And you're right, obviously we never name names and we never name methods. But there are some very worrying cases, increasingly amongst younger people, of people getting access to what we call means to suicide or lethal means through online forums or social media. And the current iteration of the Online Safety Act doesn't address that. Now, the government has set up what they call a small but risky task force. But of course, a lot of these platforms are not small. So it's currently not clear. There's been some questions that have been asked in Parliament about what government intends to do. And their response is that the Online Safety Act should capture all of this. And once it's fully online, hopefully the problem will be solved. But again, it's reliant on users reporting these things. It's reliant on users picking this up, and it's reliant on platforms putting in things to filter through the content and pick up on them before they reach. And forums like Snapchat and Telegram, which are user-to-user platforms and are encrypted, there's obviously a massive resistance from platforms to do that, because then that puts people's data at risk and it creates a risk of things leaking. So where is the solution? And that is one of the big problems we have. So it is reliant at the moment on people knowing that selling that stuff is illegal and other people reporting on it, which I'm not sure is strong enough, frankly.
Oh, no, 100% not. And you would have kind of thought in even like the age of AI and stuff like that, that it's so easy to flag that content and see, I mean, but then I guess you're right in the fact that they are encrypted platforms and they do. I don't know what the kind of law is around that.
Well, no, and because there's a massive debate going on at the moment, I think, with government and WhatsApp, which has been going on for years, because obviously WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted, and government has made several attempts to try and get access to to data in order, again, for valid reasons in terms of fighting crime, fighting terrorism, and things such as the selling of illegal drugs, which could be used to take someone's own life. And there has been this massive debate about rights to privacy, protection of data versus public safety, which is always a massive battleground for governments. You know, it happened even before the rise of social media. It happens when you talk about things such as public CCTV and face recognition cameras and things like that. It's a tightrope which is difficult for politicians to walk, and it's something that they're grappling with all the time. But platforms, I don't think, are simply doing it enough, and I don't think the regulations are strong enough to force them to do more to protect people and protect users who are exposed to this. So whether it is using things like AI, whether it is finding other ways to empower people to recognize what is really going on, what's really being sold to them, because of course often these things are dressed up in other ways. However that may be, there's simply not enough, in my opinion, being done by the platforms themselves to protect their own users from harmful content.
I just thought maybe we should go back to kind of your kind of story and stuff. Could you tell us kind of a bit more about kind of what led up to that point, and then, you know, what, you know, like kind of the aftermath of it, and what kind of treatment and care that you received, and yeah, any advice you would give to people?
Yeah, of course. So I always say I didn't wake up on the day itself thinking that I would make an attempt on my life later on that day. I really didn't. It wasn't necessarily something that I had planned that far in advance. It was 2021, and it was December 2021 where I made my attempt. But it had been months and months leading up to it where I had noticed in my own mind more and more what had started as niggling thoughts of negativity, of stuff that you might brush off on a day-to-day basis, like, oh, finding things really hard at the moment. I'm not sure why, but I'm just finding things really hard at the moment. Like, I'm tired all the time, or can't seem to find much joy in things. You just think, it's a bad day. But then those couple of bad days grew into bad weeks, bad months, and the thoughts got progressively worse and darker, to the point of feeling helpless and isolated, you know, despite being surrounded by colleagues, by friends, by family. And again, there were so many things going on at the time. Obviously, you had the stresses of the job, things going on at home and personally. It was so many different things, which in and of themselves didn't seem like massive things, but they were all piling on top of each other and just feeding this awful negative thought cycle, to the point where we got to December of 2021, where I was thinking there is absolutely no point in carrying on anymore, because nothing's ever going to get any better. I cannot see a way for things to get better. I'm all on my own. There is no pathway for me to have a positive experience of life anymore. And I became more and more withdrawn from other people. More and more I was not seeing people. And I remember on the day itself, I'd woken up, really struggled to go to work that day. It wasn't a day that we were in Parliament, but it was in the run up to Christmas, so there was a lot of Christmas fairs to go to. It's supposed to be a happy time of year for an MP, actually. You know, you get to go to all these Christmas events, you get to show your face at things and see a lot of people.
And the lights on, maybe?
Yeah, it's lights switching on. And funnily enough, it was a Christmas fair that night that I was going to, and we were having a light switching on ceremony, and it was supposed to be a great day.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the light switching on in the evening, having done a few bits in the day, And I left pretty soon after because I was just completely wiped. I emotionally was drained at forcing a smile on my face for that day. And I actually didn't go home. I went back to my my mother's house at the time, and went up to my childhood room and just stayed there for hours, hours and hours. I was just lying alone, feeding this negative thought cycle in my head. And I just remember it getting worse and worse and worse. And I wasn't upset. I wasn't crying. It was, by this point, I'd almost resigned myself to what I felt was something that was never going to get any better. And it was at that point, several hours later, that I made an attempt. Thankfully, there were other people in the house at the time, and my attempt didn't work. So there was a lot of commotion, a lot of noise. And so I was found pretty fast. And then immediately, obviously, ambulance was called and was taken to A&E and was checked over. I remember actually the psychologist that came in to assess me after I'd been was first assessed for physical damage, and then when they were happy that I hadn't done anything that would require either being admitted for surgery or anything like that, the psychologist team came in to assess me before being transported to Springfield, the mental health hospital. I remember the first words out of her mouth was like, just so you know, we know exactly who you are and what you do. I was like, oh God. And then I was like, not in a mean way.
I would be like,
No, I was not in a mean way, but the hospital was in my constituency anyway. I'd been there several times visiting and things and whatnot, and we would been working together to try and get money for a new hospital, for example. So, I wasn't necessarily surprised, but it did take me aback a little bit. And I remember my sort of MP brain almost kicking back in, and almost like, oh my God, I've got to be professional again. Right, I've got to put on its front, but I just physically couldn't. It was too much.
That was so hard.
It was. I don't know if it was looking back, I don't know if it was a shock tactic to try and like click my brain. It wasn't meant in any malicious way at all. But
oh no, I'm sure it wasn't.
Yeah. How long did you spend in Springfield?
I was in Springfield. Must have been about, was it 2 days? It was hard to tell time actually, because my phone was taken away from me, which was smart. Not by the doctors, but by my parents. They took my phone away from me because they didn't think that obviously it would have been good to have all of that stuff online, and having my work stuff on there and everything else. So it was hard to tell time, but it was about 2 days. And I was, I was very well treated there. I was given some pretty strong stuff, as you normally are after an attempt, to basically level you out. And then I was assessed several times each day, and then the doctor who was assessing me, we had quite a long session together, about a couple of hours before I was let go, where we sort of talked about what the appropriate course of treatment might be and what would work best. So it started with being discharged home, but to the community mental health team, who, even in the run up to Christmas Day, were seeing me every single day. I would have someone visit me in the afternoon, and they would spend 20 minutes or so with me just to check how I was feeling in and of that day. And also to check in on progress in terms of finding longer term treatment plan. So the big thing obviously was to try and find talking therapies. That was the try and find cognitive behavioral therapy. I had decided that with them, because the waiting list for talking therapies on the NHS was so long, I was in a privileged position as an MP, so I did pay for BetterHelp, the online therapy platform, rather than waiting. I was doing NHS treatment as well, but I decided to add that onto my treatment, which is probably why I was discharged from the community health team after about a month. So yeah, they stayed with me for about a month because I'd started some form of therapy. And then throughout...
Sorry to interrupt you. Were you actually sectioned, or did you go to the mental hospital voluntarily?
I went voluntarily. So they phoned Springfield to see if they had a bed, and I was told we can send you there without sectioning you to get assessed and work up a treatment, or otherwise they would have discharged me home. So they weren't in a position that I was going to be sectioned, because after I'd been assessed, they had, which I think was the correct diagnosis, that, you know, whilst there was obviously mental ill health going on there and there were chemical imbalances to address, actually the primary reasons for me getting there were personal and work related. They were not because I was having a psychotic episode or whatever, so they decided not to section me, but they did offer me the chance to go there and get assessed by the specialists there, and then be discharged with a treatment plan, which I agreed to take up, and I'm glad I did. And then, yeah, once I was discharged from the community team, I spent the next probably about 18 months doing talking therapies and cognitive behavioral therapy. Quite frequent to start off with. So about 2 times a week, down to once a week, down to once a fortnight, down to once a month. And then eventually, after nearly 2 years at it, petered out. And the medication I was on again followed a similar sequence, so it got less and less strong, and then when it got to the weakest, took it once every 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, etc., until it petered out that I didn't use it anymore, which again is not everyone's experience, and some people will never get to the stage where they fully come off treatment, or at least it might take them a lot longer. For me, I was lucky. I had people in my life. I had an absolutely amazing team who worked for me at the time, that were supporting me in terms of keeping up with the work we had to do. We couldn't stop working because people have to be represented, so they helped me a lot. And I think the thing that really saved me was my friends and family. And the thing that I just wish I had done a long time ago was start to have those conversations with them. You know, I always say it starts with a conversation. It's not a medical intervention. It's not a life-saving thing necessarily in and of itself, but it can be. It really can be. You know, just having that chat with someone and starting to explore how you're feeling could be the start of a journey. And I just wish I'd done it sooner, because I felt so alone in that moment. And I genuinely didn't think I could talk to anyone about it, because either they didn't care, or I would be burdening them. And of course, that's so not true. That's so not true.
It's weird how your brain tells you these things when you're struggling, that you kind of have this idea that people don't care, like people who've been with you throughout your whole life don't care that you're struggling. It's really bizarre.
And I just wish I had done that sooner, because I genuinely don't think I would have gotten to that crisis point if I had spoken sooner.
Well, just one other question, thing I'm really interested in is what sort of prompted you to disclose that experience to Parliament?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I was
Only
going
3
to.
years later, yeah.
It'd be something that I would been thinking about, because throughout my time as an MP, I had noticed that mental health was coming up more and more when people were coming to see me in my surgeries or contacting me for help. So you would deal with however many thousands of cases as an MP every year. And it was almost every time, or at least every two or three cases. It wouldn't be the reason that they were coming to see you necessarily. There were obviously people who came to see you because they weren't getting access to treatment, or they were struggling to find support and they wanted your help. But it was more that people were coming to me because they were having this issue going on in their lives and it was exacerbating their mental ill health. And I just saw myself in that so much. And I remember thinking, God, yeah, they're just going through stuff in life, but it's throwing up this massive risk to them. They're really struggling, whether it be difficulty with social housing, whether it be financial issues that they're going through that they're coming to you for, whether it be having a battle with an organization or a council, whatever it might be. That's the problem that they're trying to solve. But it's in the background here is their mental health getting worse and worse. And people used to break down in my surgeries all the time. And they used to get really apologetic and say, oh, I'm so sorry for getting upset. I know it doesn't seem like a very big issue. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's exactly how I felt. Individually, these issues that I felt I was dealing with were not massive in and of themselves, but they all came together and made life really hard. And I just remember thinking, God, I remember feeling like that. And I remember thinking, I just wish someone would tell me that things would be okay. And, or someone else can say to you, oh, I've been through something and I've come out the other side of it, because I just didn't believe anyone ever could. So I'd been thinking about it. And then the opportunity arose that day. And I remember going into Parliament that day thinking, okay, it's Prime Minister's questions today. If I get called to ask a question, I think I want to tell my story now. I felt ready. I was like, I'm not on treatment anymore. I think I'm ready to share this. And maybe it will help someone if they hear it in a platform like this. It was very deliberate that it was Prime Minister's questions, because it's the busiest time of the week. We're always asked by your own side, if you're asking a question to your own Prime Minister, who was Rishi Sunak at the time, give us a heads up if you're going to ask something, and we can try and get you a really good answer. And I'd said to the Prime Minister's team, I want to talk about mental health. I want to talk about a personal story, but I hadn't given them the sort of the full thing. And then even as the speaker said my name and I stood up, I very nearly second guessed myself, and I very nearly asked a completely different question. I had a backup in my pocket of something local, that if I felt as I stood up that this wasn't going to be right, I was going to deviate and ask a completely different question. But I did. I asked the question, and then the rest of it was a blur that day. It really was. I remember sitting down and having all these hands and all these arms around me from my colleagues, which was lovely. And then PMQs came to an end, and then obviously lots of people came over. The now Prime Minister Keir Starmer came over to me. The Prime Minister at the time, Rishi, asked me to go into his office to see him afterwards and to chat some more. And then my phone was going mad, and suddenly we were getting loads of media requests again. And the sort of month in the aftermath from it was just such a blur. And I wasn't necessarily really expecting it. I thought I would share my story in and of that moment, and then that would be it. but it carried on, and it's led me to do some really wonderful things. And for the rest of my time as an MP, which was quite short by that point, but for my rest of my short time in Parliament, after that, I did work with government to try and get this right. And then after I lost my seat, I was so lucky that a job with Samaritans came up, who I'd been privileged to meet before. And I just thought, you know what, this is the stars aligning now, you know, whereas before, and I think I've come full circle, before the world was telling me that there's no way out. And now I feel like the world was showing me, this is what you're meant to carry on doing now. You know, the job advert had popped up on my phone. I'd worked with these people before that I'm working with now. And I always say this story. I remember the day that I got the job offer from Samaritans, I was at a comedy show, and this comedian, Sarah Millican.
Oh, we love Sarah Millican, don't we, Mum?
Yeah.
But I didn't know this, but she collects for Samaritans after every single show.
Oh, wow.
And we got through the whole show. The job offer had come in that morning. I was considering it. And then we went to that show in the evening, and the show came to an end, and she said, I'm collecting for Samaritans. And I looked at my mum and my partner Jed, who was with me, and we just looked at each other and we said, it's a sign, you've got to do it, and so it was a real, I think, almost like a turning point in my life that day. It was when I moved from recovery into advocacy, really, and that was the day that things changed.
Oh, bless you. Well, do you have any more questions, Mum?
I don't. I'd love to ask you more about your work at the Samaritans, but we've already taken an hour of your time.
I know.
So,
well, maybe another episode.
Part 2.
It would be really interesting for you maybe to talk more about the Samaritans at a different point.
Yeah,
you're obviously
100%.
doing lots of work. I have actually, I think they are really helpful, actually, the Samaritans, because they seem to be the only real true crisis team, in my opinion. You know, because there are very few organisations
as well
that answer calls.
Absolutely. And having that focus on suicide prevention, I think, was very important to me. You know, not lumping suicide in with mental health more broadly was very important to me, because I feel like it does deserve its own spotlight. It's still the biggest killer of men under the age of 50. It's still the biggest killer of young people under the age of 35, I think I'm right in saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sadly not going down. If the rates are remaining stubbornly high, and as high as they've been, I think, since the 90s. So I do think that it warrants its own work, which is why I'm delighted to be working specifically in that field.
Yeah, well, it sounds really incredible, and it's really incredible you've been able to overcome everything in such a way. It's kind of quite a unique story, but also not at the same time. Like, lots of the aspects to it are very unique, but I guess what you've been through is quite, it'll
happen to a lot of people in their lives.
That's what. Sorry, I was like the words to say this, but it is, and it's so interesting the way that you've kind of the way you've become an advocate, and you should be very proud of yourself.
Oh, thank you. Well, so should you both. I mean, just hearing the work that you both have done is really inspiring. So it's a real delight for me to have some time to spend with you both to talk about this.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And we'll, in this episode, we'll include like a link to Samaritans and Mind, just so, in case anyone listening struggling. And thank you so much. Thanks
very much. We'll be in touch. Okay.